Just for so you can see what the numbers show, let me pull it up. I actually ran some numbers prior to our time in terms of what your weighted average would be. So let me pull that up so you can see. If you're looking on screen, you're looking at a weighted average calculator, and I took the $50,000 of loans that person one has that has 107 months of credit, and then the 33,000 she has that have 13 months of credit, put it in a weighted average calculator. The weighted average would be just under 70 months credit. So for the loans that only have 13 months, they'd be getting a pretty good bump. They'd be going from 13 to about 70. For the loans that are at 107, they'd be going down from 107 to 70. If we knew that they would be handled this way, then at least you'd have a bit more of a decision to make. But now that we know there's a possibility that you might consolidate and go back to zero again, a year from now when they've given more clarity, this may be something where you might have made a different decision. But with what you have in front of you right now, I would argue this is probably the best decision you can make based on those variables. All right. Now, the next question I have, and I'm going to, let's see here, talk about household income a bit. Don't need to get into, specifics of who owes what or who, but I would like to know if you combined your household income. I think when I looked on your tax return, it was between $160,000 to $170,000. Does that sound about right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, let's operate under the assumption that we get what we're looking for, and those 2 months of, those 2 loans that have about $50,000 are just wiped away. They're forgiven under public service loan forgiveness. Now you have a series of loans that are left that collectively are about $33,000. In that scenario, what would be your preferred way of getting rid of those loans?
I feel like with our income, I'll just have to do like a standard payment plan. And what I would do would be try to pay more on the lowest one and then just kind of snowball it till they were paid off. I imagine I could probably do that in less than 10 years.
Yeah, I actually think that not only is that the wise option, I think that it's going to end up being the only option that you have. And part of it, and the reason I'm talking about the loan balance that would remain as compared to your household income, we've talked about on the podcast in the past where it's like once you get to the point where you kind of owe less than what you make, you start to need to think, you need to start thinking about actually paying it off in full because of what's called a partial financial hardship. A partial financial hardship just means that if you try to apply to an income-based repayment plan and they calculate your payment and they find out that it would actually cost you less to just pay it off in 10 years as compared to signing up for that income-based repayment plan, they will not let you make that income-based repayment. So for looking at those loans that remain, you talked about, doing a snowball. We can't see the interest rate since they're all in save forbearance, but there are 2 ways that you could attack that snowball. It could be, take the lowest loan balance first and just put extra on that payment and then, tackle the one with the next lowest loan balance. In most cases, that if you're trying to have like the motivation of, paying off something and getting that extra kick to keep going, that can be something that can be very helpful. Another way to go about it, which again, it just depends on what you prefer, would be to tackle the one with the highest interest rate in terms of, and I wouldn't even just think about like the number of the interest rate. I would be thinking about literally the total interest that's accruing. So an example would be a $20,000 loan at 5% interest may be accruing more interest on a yearly basis than a $7,000 loan at 10% interest. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that's just different factors that you could consider. But what I did was I plugged your information for you and your spouse into our Escape Student Loan Debt calculator so that you can just kind of see what you alluded to, and I think is spot on. I put your adjusted gross income from your previous year's tax return which is 161,000, give or take. I put your family size of 3 people. I put a student loan balance of 33,000. So we're going to assume, like I said, that those other 2 loans are wiped away. And because we can't see the interest rate on your student loan statement, I just assumed it was around 7% interest. And if you look over at the calculation that you see for the different payment plans, you see the pay-as-you-earn / new income-based repayment plan, the old income-based repayment plan, and the 10-year standard plan. And under this option, you'll see that all 3 show the exact same amount per month. It shows $383.16 per month. That is not because all of them have the same way to calculate payments. It's because under all 3 of these options, what has happened is they've calculated what you would pay under the income-based repayment or income-driven repayment plans, and it is so much higher than what it would be to just pay it off in 10 years, it has just reverted you to the 10-year payment. Now, the good thing is, you said you were paying $360 a month on Save prior to all this changing. At $383 a month, not that there's a positive to having to continue to pay these loans, but at least we're in a situation where, because that loan balance would have dropped in this scenario, it's costing you significantly less than it would have if we continue to be on income-driven repayment plans.
Okay.
The last thing, and this would come after we have gotten all of these things accomplished. So after we've done public service loan forgiveness buyback, after we've gone through the process of determining what your interest rate is on those remaining loans, so on and so forth, if you're in the scenario where, you'd be owing, in terms of what you owe compared to what you make, you're talking about less than 20%. So definitely want to optimize our repayment as compared to having it forgiven. And when that is the case, and you're nowhere near owing about what you make or owing more than what you make, you want to make sure that you have the best interest rate and best repayment terms possible. So I can't see the interest rate on your federal student loans right now, but whenever you figure out what that rate is, you need to be in the category of people who I tell consistently, hey, set a calendar reminder for every quarter and start checking the interest rate for private student loans. And if you get to the point where there's a big gap, to me, a big gap would be like at least 0.5% or more between what you have on your federal loan and what you have on a private loan, then I would start to consider, if that ever occurs, looking into refinancing with a private lender. I have up on screen one last thing that I want you to see. I'm going to look at this student loan refinance calculator. This is not an endorsement for SoFi. They just have a quick calculator that's available on their website. So we're going to put in $33,000 of remaining loans. Again, for conversation's sake, we're going to assume that you have an interest rate of 7%. We're going to look and see what your payment would be if we had 120 months left, which is 10 years. In that scenario, your payment, just like we calculated on our calculator, would be $383 a month. But if you go down here to the interest rate, they will show you that, at least with SoFi, and this is dependent on a number of factors such as your credit, your income, they have rates for 10-year loans as low as 5.22%. So in this scenario, if you do have a 7% interest rate, and you do have stellar credit, which you do, I've looked at your credit score, then you would consider, or I would consider, saying, hey, I can save myself almost 2% if I get the best rate on this private student loan. Let me do a soft pull of my credit, which most private student loan lenders will give you a soft pull of your credit, and they will give you an idea of what your interest rate will be without you actually having to apply. That's why I would recommend that on a quarterly basis, you kind of keep your eye on rates, because it may be, maybe not this year, but maybe even 2 years into that repayment, 3 years into that repayment, you might find yourself in a position where you can drop down to a 7-year or a 5-year and keep your payment the same while saving a lot of money because of that difference in interest rates.
Okay.
All right. Now, I know that was a whole lot of information, but for that second piece, those loans that would be remaining, do you have any questions about that process?
I don't think so. Um, I had those loans during the pandemic and called my loan servicer at the time it was Fed Loan Servicing and asked them to take them out of in-school forbearance. They didn't do it, so those COVID months didn't count. If they would have, then I'd only have 7 years left on. I don't think that they would go back and to reverse that decision. So I think I'm just gonna have to.
Yeah, I am.
Um,
I think you're right there. Those types of things are notoriously difficult to get reversed in any administration. The one thing I would say in terms of, because I teased this and I'm now remembering that I didn't forget I forgot to bring it up, I should say. Some of the things that were recently released in guidance by the Department of Education, it does not give a lot of sunshine to the possibility of you getting those in-school deferment or in-school forbearance months changed. But one of the things that they did say in terms of options for borrowers who are navigating these times is they actually mentioned public service loan forgiveness buyback. Like they put it as an option for people who are still experiencing SAVE forbearance and things of that nature. So to me, that's a real positive because we were worried that the incoming administration would do away with public service loan forgiveness buyback. So the fact that they are not only mentioning it as an option, but there's been no indication in this release that it's something that they're like evaluating. At least we know that for the bulk of your loans, that option exists. And if you get those 4 months credit, as you mentioned, in that buyback process, hopefully they shine a little happier light or brighter light on it than you trying to get that reversed through your loan servicer, if that makes sense.
okay.
Well, like I said, that was a lot. I'm hoping that this was a positive experience for you. We are extremely grateful for your time. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Can't think of anything else except for thank you so much for doing this podcast. It's really relieved some anxiety of all the changes that have been happening, and I think you guys do a great job.
Oh man, I appreciate that so much. I am honored that you are a listener, and I am looking forward to the day that you no longer have to be a listener. How about that?
From Escape Student Loan Debt, this was the Escape Student Loan Debt Podcast, a show for established professionals whose student loan payments or loan balances are impacting their marriage, their business, their credit, or their dream of achieving homeownership.